So, in this video, I wanted to get a little existentialist about gender and about gender norms and gender identity and gender expression and gender binary. Yuck. So that's what I'm gonna do. So gender is another one of those things which is socially constructed, and socially constructed things mean that people who fall easily within the constructed categories don't often question it or think about it because they're benefiting from it. Most of the time, some of the time. And gender is one of those things. If you are a cis male or a cis female, odds are you've never really thought about gender in a critical way. And that's okay. I mean, you're not really expected to, but it is important that you understand why others think about gender in such a critical way and how that impacts their daily lives and things like that. Two of the very important readings for this week were Mutilating Gender by Dean Spade, who is one of the WST gods, and also My Life Without Gender, which was a Guardian article. So first let's talk about gender and the gender binary. So gender binary says that there are males and there are females, and if you're cis or perfectly trans, then that's okay for you. But for a lot of us, I guess not a lot, maybe there's not a lot of us, but for many people, there is this feeling that neither gender fits, or both genders fit, or maybe somewhere in the middle fits. And that's okay too. But it's hard to express that to people who have never come to question their gender in that way, because gender binary is so inherent in the society we live in. It's the number one indicator of almost everything. When have you signed up for a website, or applied for a job, or maybe even gotten your car washed without being asked male or female, check a box? And that's complicated for people that don't feel either box, or don't feel that they can fit in the box that they want to fit in. So for me, I feel that I have no gender. I feel that gender is basically useless in my life, and I don't need it. And that's a very recent realization for me, growing up in a conservative town where gender binary was really the only option. You don't think about that stuff. So it wasn't until I was 20 years old that I was like, hey, I'm gonna start using they, them pronouns now, thanks. And that's what's right for me, but that's not what's right for everyone. And that's kind of when it gets tricky, because there are traits which have been assigned inherently male or inherently female. Being a good nurturer is female, being an effective leader is male, being soft and compassionate is female, being hard and logical is male. And so when looking at trans identities, it's easy to get confused if you're, I guess, uneducated on the topic about what exactly the feelings are that allow someone to say, oh, I'm really trying not to step on any toes here and sound like an asshole. Trans identities are very complicated for people that have never questioned their gender identity, because they think, what about you as an individual makes you feel that you are not the gender that you are? And a lot of that is tied to gender expression and gender identity and gender norms. Although it is important to note that gender identity and gender expression do not have to match in order for you to be valid as whatever gender you are. That is, you do not validate a trans woman only if she's passable. And Janet Mock has discussed the issues of passing in a few videos that you can find on the interwebs. And she says that passing, or even the word passing, implies that there is something sneaky about trans people, that they are trying to deceive you in some way, and that you should be cautious of these tricksters, and that's not what trans identity is. Some trans individuals feel comfortable with a gender expression that is more closely linked to their gender, and some feel comfortable continuing to express their gender identity in a way that fits their biological sex. It doesn't make anyone more or less of a valid individual, and that's very key. So, Dean Spade's article on basically the difficulty of becoming trans and the difficulty that comes with requesting resources that aren't always allocated to you because of your sex. And like I said, that's all very complicated. If you're never someone who's questioned your gender, you don't really think about the logistics of trying to change your driver's license gender or applying for a marriage license pre-legalization of same-sex marriage, and like what gender do you have to apply to get to marry your spouse, but also have you changed your gender on everything? How do you change your gender on your social security card? Like, all of that's very complicated and not thought about by cis people. But also then there are individuals such as myself who feel that neither gender work, or as I said, both or in between or whatever, in which case those boxes aren't really sufficient. Facebook has a they-them pronouns option, which is like pretty cool. But I mean, for the most part, like a lot of government entities don't really recognize that there is anything other than male and female. And that is a continual cycle of feeling not validated, of being like, oh yeah, well, I'm neither, so like what am I gonna do with this health insurance form? It's a constant reminder that the option that you have chosen isn't an option that's been given to you by and large, by society, which it's dehumanizing and it's really frustrating. And to try and explain to people that they and them can be used in a singular form is just so mind-boggling to a lot of people. And then I'm like, well, if someone's at the door and you don't know who's at the door, you'll say, oh, I'll go get them. And then everyone like suddenly gets it, unless they're angry, and then they'll fight with you, and then you just like want to go home and have some tea. Whatever. So, I also was really interested, as I said, in the My Life Without Gender article, because as someone without gender, I both related to and was intrigued by a lot of this article. My gender expression has always been very female for all 21 years of my life. I've looked very feminine because that's what I'm comfortable with and because I spend a lot of money on makeup. So, the idea of having a genderless appearance is pretty enticing, actually, sometimes. But it also invites a lot of unwanted questions. And that's another thing with gendered bodies, is that people feel the need to comment when you appear as anything other than cis, and people like want to know like what's in your pants, and I'm like, are you interested in sleeping with me? Why are you asking this question? Blah blah blah. So being anything other than cis in this society unfortunately opens you up to a lot of questions from strangers on the street or in a classroom or while getting your morning coffee, and that's not great, and it makes people that aren't cis feel very uncomfortable and feel like they need to defend themselves and their gender to strangers all of the time, and makes life really difficult. And so, yeah, so like to tie it all back to social construction of things, like that's why something that people have seen as so essential, such as gender, is really so non-essential, and the process of reinforcing it as like, this is the gender binary and you need to pick and you need to look one way or another and you need to have these traits and this traits, but if you have these traits then you belong over here, but if you have like this hairstyle then you belong over here. Like, it's all very complicated, and to relegate the entire human population to either male or female is incredibly ignorant and dismissive of a really large chunk of human beings. The idea of transness or third gender or none of the above isn't new. A lot of LGBT naysayers will say that being trans is like this new fad that's happening. Things such as trans individuals or similar to trans individuals have existed in many other cultures for many years, without question. Sometimes with question, but sometimes without question. Gender is just very complicated in that there is no need for it, and yet we have put the highest priority on needing to know, on needing to cut open a cake and have light blue M&Ms fall out of it so that everyone knows you're carrying a boy in your belly. There's no need. No need.